Chapter 11. The Deal 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jiang Ruolin just silently watched Xian Zihao. With wet hair that had not yet dried and a clean, white bathrobe was tied around his body, casually making him look naturally sleek and noble. She turned her head slightly and looked at the blue pool in front of her. President Xian, I was drunk last night and unconscious. I don't know what happened next, but I found myself in that bed when I woke up in the morning. You have to believe me. I had nothing to do with Han Shuigang's plan. I know. Ah. You know. Jiang Ruolin looked at him with astonishment. What do you really mean? Han Shuigang is your boyfriend. Instead of answering, Xian Zihao suddenly asked her. No matter how much she hated him, she would still feel pain in her heart. In the end, she took a deep breath and pursed her lips as if nothing had happened. Before, he was, but after that incident, I had nothing to do with him. Xian Zihao placed a newspaper on a round white table between the two of them. Jiang Ruolin's sharp eyes saw that the news about them filled the entire front page. She immediately looked at him, only to see that his eyes were clear as spring water. Since you are working on the media platform, you should know that this news has spread across the city today. Seeing her puzzled face, Xian Zihao did not try to hide it while saying indifferently, I asked someone to check your background. Although she was shocked and uncomfortable, she understood the way he thought. After all, she unconsciously climbed into his bed and almost caused his reputation to fall into the drain. Jiang Ruolin calmed down a little. Honestly, this matter causes a lot of problems for me, too. Tonight, I will write an explanation, and believe me, I will not get you involved. I will explain this to everyone that it was just a misunderstanding. How are you going to do that? Xian Zihao's expression was indifferent, smooth, and calm. His slightly raised lips had a taunting edge. First of all, I have a media platform next to me that can help broadcast all the information, and I will use it to clarify everything as soon as possible. After all, these things are fake. Soon everyone will understand that it's just a misunderstanding. From the information I obtained, you are responsible for the business part. Miss Jiang, you should be clear that as president of the Xian Group, there is no room for me to retract my words. Even though I didn't care about other people's opinions, I still have no choice but to pay attention to them. To be Xian Group's CEO, I have no choice but to follow Xian family rules. Even if I denied it, it would be considered as entertaining the public. So, how are you going to solve it? You also need to explain it to your family. Xian Zihao seemed to be thinking about something very cruel. His smile was as lively as clouds and wind. His eyes were as bright as black obsidian, and there was a strange smile on his lips. Chapter 12. The Deal 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. How could Jiang Ruolin not know that this matter was not something that can be explained by simply being labeled as a misunderstanding? President Xian, you are indeed someone who will be responsible for your words and actions. I know about it, but these rumors are spreading so quickly, if we do not explain it now, we may not be able to avoid it in the future. With that, Jiang Ruolin said thoughtfully, other than explaining the real thing, I really can't think of any other way to solve this situation. That's right. You are a dignified CEO of Xian Group. No one dares to spread rumors about you. How about this? I will say that I broke up with you. I will consider my words carefully and try my best so that everyone can accept. Miss Jiang, before you met me, what kind of person is Xian Zihao? He suddenly said this. Jiang Ruolin was startled. She looked at him hesitantly. Ha! Describe what you hear about me as completely as possible. Seeing that he did not intend to joke, Jiang Ruolin felt her head was about to explode. How should she answer this question? President Xian, I will be honest with you. From the rumors I heard, when you were a teenager, you received many internationally recognized awards. Once you returned from studying abroad, you set foot into the business world, and over the past 5 years, your sixth sense and sharpness have shaped who you are now. You are the light of the Xian family. I want to hear negative reviews, not flattery. Xian Zihao chuckled. Although his face was full of smiles, it still made her, Jiang Rulan, feel intense oppression. The man in front of her was the president of the Xian group. To say negative things about him made her feel like a tiger was watching her. Jiang Rulan opened her mouth and stuttered. Teed up, the negative things I heard are not many. It's just that everyone thinks that you are too young to hold a position as CEO. They say you are not mature and competent enough. However, this is only a small part of it. Most people still trust you, President Xian. Right. I am too young, immature, and not strong enough. Many people think that I've achieved my position so easily because I am a legitimate heir of Xian family. Then, Ms. Jiang, if I denied these rumors, do you know what the consequences are? Jiang Rulan was speechless. Han Shuigang was indeed vicious. He tried to frame Xian Zihao, but he never thought that Xian Zihao would easily reverse the situation. However, the consequences of explaining these rumors were much worse than she expected. Jiang Rulan felt that she was in danger and stood on the edge of the ocean. She hesitated for a moment before asking, then, Mr. Xian, what do you think we should do now? He did not immediately answer but stood quietly. His tall, slender figure slowly moved around the pool, and after a while, he glanced at her. We're getting married. Chapter 13. Enemy I. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Married. Jiang Rulan stood with whoosh and looked at Xian Zihao with a pair of cold eyes. She said with astonishment. You can stop joking with me at a time like this. Do I look like I'm joking? His beautiful eyebrows were slightly raised as he slowly walked towards her until he was half a meter away. Miss Jiang, I don't like solving problems with violence. You must know what is going on right now. You surely understood the implications. They both stood so close that it made Jiang Rulan panic and did not dare to move recklessly. However, she still looked at him with disbelief. In his eyes, there was no trace of humor. I think there are other methods we can consider. I'll give you 2 days to think about it. Xian Zihao's faint voice interrupted her. His gaze shifted to the phone in the left pocket of her jacket. Suddenly, he reached out for her phone and pressed a few numbers on it. Jiang Rulan watched his movements in confusion. She wanted to ask, but as she opened her mouth, he cut her. This is my number. If you have a problem within these 2 days, you can come and see me at any time. With that, he returned the phone to her while smiling elegantly. We are on the same side, and our fate has been decided by coincidence. Miss Jiang, you are a smart person. You should know what I meant, right? Of course she understood the meaning. No matter what happened in the future, she will not be able to escape unscathed. She paused and did not reject his proposal. She held her phone tightly while nodding. I understand. Although it was a bit sudden, I will think about it carefully. Xian Zihao tilted his head and looked up at the sky outside the window. It's late. Should I take you home? No need. I'll take a taxi. She quickly took a step back and nodded at him. Under the supervision of staff members, Jiang Rulan ran to the elevator and covered her chest with her hands. She stared at the elevator mirror with her eyes wide open and pale face. She still could not believe what had just happened. When the elevator stopped on the first floor, she quickly walked outside with her head lowered. Because she was in a hurry, she did not notice 2 people were heading towards her and crashed into them. Are you blind or what? How can you bump into us? Jiang Rulan immediately stepped back and wanted to apologize before she saw who it was. She looked at the man and woman who were leaning against each other in front of her. The woman glanced at her with an arrogant expression, her hand holding the man's arm, and the man was Han Shuigang. Jiang Rulan. Han Shuigang was also surprised to see her here. He looked up and down a few times and sneered. This is really a narrow path to meet the enemy. What? Do you think you can get into this club just because you have the title of fiancé to Xian Zihao? How can you think that you deserve to come here? Shui, who is this woman? The woman next to Han Shuigang, whose half-body pressed against his arm, looked at her, Jiang Rulan, in annoyance, and asked suspiciously. Chapter 14. Enemy 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Her. Do you remember what I once said about the woman who chased me in college? This is her. So it's her. Wow, I did not think there could be a shameless woman like her. Didn't you say she was in F City? Why is she here? Observing their style of talking badly about herself made Jiang Rulan understood why Han Shuigang was always on the phone and busy after she came to H City. It turned out that 2 years after graduating, when she was still stupid to hold on to their love, he already had a new woman. The doubts that had accumulated in her heart for so long finally cleared in the blink of an eye. When she met Xiong Rugang last weekend at the mall, she saw Han Shuigang walking out of a jewelry store in the city center. She was so excited to think that he would propose to her, but when she saw that he had not done anything the next day, she could not refrain from asking. Jiang Rulan thought he was panicking because she knew about the surprise, but she did not think the woman he was proposing was not her. In doubt, he hugged her and told her that he was not ready to propose to her, and he promised that he would marry her within 6 months. Those small blessings were gone in an instant. The cruel and sharp words mocked her stupidity and naivety. She looked at the unshakable man and woman in front of her and the dazzling diamond ring on the woman's ring finger. Oh, how wrong she was. Her hand that was holding the phone was slowly tightened. Jiang Rulan's eyes gradually turned red. Of course, she would not cry. Her eyes were red because of anger. She gritted her teeth as she looked at Han Shuigang with contempt and ridicule. It's natural for you to walk on 2 ships. It's nice to talk about love while hugging other women, isn't it? Han Shuigang suddenly narrowed his eyes. Jiang Rulan, do not make yourself look innocent. Who wants a woman like you who is very ugly and does not have a beautiful figure? First, go back and look at yourself in the mirror. Your face alone makes people want to vomit. Pa! This loud noise immediately silenced the loud commotion on the first floor of the aristocratic hall. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look at 2 women and a man standing in the middle. Ah! You dare hit my boyfriend? Han Shuigang, who was slapped, couldn't open his mouth before the woman next to him shouted angrily, and swung the bag in her hand to her. Jiang Rulan, face. Jiang Rulan looked at Han Shuigang's stormy face, coldly. She gritted her teeth and cursed under her breath. Bastard. Then, she quickly dodged the woman's bag and stepped back. Ignoring the audience around her, she pushed the woman who pounced on her and looked back angrily at Han Shuigang. Han Shuigang, I curse you, bastard, for a horrible death. You dared to hit my boyfriend and cursed him. You are such a whore. Scram. Jiang Rulan shouted at the woman. Jiang Rulan, don't go too far. Chapter 15. Enemy 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Who went overboard? I always see you as a man who tries hard to go up, but it turns out you are very despicable and dirty. I, Jiang Rulan, am too stupid. You are the one who is a hypocrite. Han Shuigang, I'm warning you. Do not think that you can do whatever you want just because a woman loves you. Do not push me. Jiang Rulan may not have much ability, but it was still possible for her to fight with teeth for teeth, eyes for eyes. Are you threatening me? Was it a threat or a disdain? You know it very well. Jiang Rulan didn't give him any face as she held her head high. She would never allow herself to be beaten or bullied like those women in those sentimental scenes, that would only show weakness through the tears. She shifted her gaze to the woman in his arms, who seemed to have a rich family background. Han Shuigang hugged the woman and did not let her be impulsive, like running and arguing with her, Jiang Rulan. The former lover observed the anger in Jiang Rulan's eyes with contempt and indifference, then lowered his head and comforted the woman in his arms. Fair, she doesn't care about her reputation at all. Why do you have to be angry with her? This slap. Just think of it as retaliation for her years of madness against me. We don't owe her anything after this. Fair. Jiang Rulan almost vomited blood. She suddenly stared at the woman in his arms. No wonder she felt that this woman looked a little familiar. So this woman was the daughter of the chairman of the Ling family from Ji City, whom she had interviewed in private, Ling Fair. When interviewing Chairman Ling at the Ling residence, Jiang Rulan chanced upon a young woman driving a BMW passing by. The woman casually greeted them as she passed by, and Director Ling smiled and said that she was his only daughter, Ling Fair. At that moment, Jiang Rulan understood. She finally understood how Han Shuigang, an ordinary university student without a good background, could become the Ling Group's vice president in 2 years. That's all because of the Ling family. He was using women to sword his position. Her mocking gaze seemed to pierce Han Shuigang. When Jiang Rulan glanced at him sarcastically, he just hugged Ling Fair more tightly, as if he wanted to prove to her that he loved the woman in his arms. Jiang Rulan suddenly laughed out loud, haha. What are you laughing at? Ling Fair, who had been comforted by Han Shuigang, glared at her. Ha ha ha. Jiang Rulan cried. The anger in her eyes had long turned into compassion. She looked at Ling Fair, who was about 20 years old, and said, I was laughing at you. You are as stupid as I am, you. Jiang Rulan. Han Shuigang shouted in a low voice, clearly afraid that she would say something. Jiang Rulan had no intention of warning Ling Fair at all. Seeing Han Shuigang's anxious face, the curve of her mouth lifted. She never thought that she had a very high level of patience. She laughed out loud and stepped forward. Under the suspicious gaze of Ling Fair, she raised her hand and pushed the couple in front of her forcefully from blocking her path, then walked out of the building. Che. Look at her arrogant attitude. I'm going to find my dad and... Stop it, Fair. She's just a sad woman with a broken heart. What are you going to do? Aren't we going to meet a friend? Let's go. Chapter 16. Why are you crying? You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Not far from the club, Jiang Rulan's calm face finally collapsed. Her footsteps became slower as she unconsciously walked into the corner of the building with no one around. Her body leaned against the wall, and her bag fell to the ground. The tears she held back finally flowed down her face. Within just 4 years, it was as if she had gone through an entire cycle of reincarnation. That clean and handsome man was hugging another woman's thigh for fame and true love. Moreover, he wisely planned and used her by sending her to someone else's bed. Jiang Rulan did not want to cry. She did not want to cry for such a man. Her 1,000 days of longing and love were shattered in one day. She didn't want to cry, but she had to. Tears continued to flow like a broken dam. She sometimes raised her hand to wipe the moisture from her face, but in the blink of an eye, her face was once again wet with salty tears. In the end, she simply sat on the ground without caring for her image. She was biting her lip while quietly crying. Jiang Rulan only raised her head when a pair of slender, straight legs stopped in front of her. You, why are you here? She was stunned. The extraordinary man had one hand in his pocket while looking at her crying face. His voice was indifferent. Just now, you swore that you would take revenge just as he did on you. But now, you're crying so miserably right after you turn around. Jiang Rulan paused for a moment before raising her hand and rubbing her eyes. She muttered in a shy tone, did you see everything? Xian Zihao didn't reply. He was looking at her. After a while, he said, "Sorry, Miss Jiang, I am not used to carrying handkerchiefs and tissues." Jiang Rulan pulled out a packet of tissue from her bag on the floor to wipe her tears. She took a deep breath before standing with the bag in her hand. She raised her eyebrow and looked at Xian Zihao. President Xian is so cold even when he's telling a joke. Xian Zihao raised his eyebrows and walked towards the black Land Rover next to the road and said, "Come in. I'll take you home." The car's price was neither expensive nor cheaper, the appearance was casual and low-key, just like Xian Zihao's noble and elegant temperament. This was the first time she had met such a man who was satisfied with everything and did not show off his wealth and strength. Maybe this was what a true nobleman looks like. "I'll take a taxi myself." She did not hesitate to turn around and leave. Ling Feier's father is not a nobody. What will happen if the Ling family targets you? Xian Zihao did not stop her. His voice was as indifferent as ever. Jiang Rulan froze in her steps and turned around abruptly. What kind of man was this Xian Zihao? It seemed as he was approachable, but at the same time, he made people tremble. That's right, with Ling Feier's temper, she definitely would suffer a loss. How could Ling Feier let her have a good life? Furthermore, she had such strong backing. Jiang Rulan was too preoccupied with her sadness to think about the consequences, but Xian Zihao's next words sent chills down her spine. Chapter 17. Shouldn't you be happy? You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 17. Shouldn't you be happy? Seeing the various changes in her expression, Xian Zihao knew that Jiang Rulan was indeed a smart woman. She did not need many hints to understand all the problems she was facing. Xian Zihao said nothing and took out his electronic car key to open the car door. This time, Jiang Rulan did not refuse him. She looked at him hesitantly as he got into the driver's seat. She walked towards the Land Rover hesitantly. The car window was slowly lowered as he spoke in a low magnetic voice, "Get in. President Xian. Jiang Rulan." He suddenly called her by her name, causing her to be stunned for a moment. A little impatience appeared in his eyes. Is it difficult to lower your self-esteem to one person? Jiang Rulan opened the car door and sat in the passenger seat. I do not have a noble and holy personality. In this era, those who are not afraid of power are all immature nationalist youth. Only just because I compromise doesn't mean I have to lower my head to anyone. Was this the way you compromise? Xian Zihao sneered as he started the engine, turned the steering wheel, and drove the car into the traffic. Besides marrying you, is there any other way to solve this problem? Jiang Rulan took a deep breath. Nothing is absolute. However, looking at it from other points, other than this method, there is no other way for us. Xian Zihao's gaze was fixed on the traffic, and his voice was so calm that it was difficult to say whether he was happy or angry. But news that you are my fiancé has been spread by the media and the public. Explaining it will only bring worse results. Xian Zihao shifted gears and accelerated. Han Shuigang or any of the Ling family wants to take revenge on you. With your current situation, you are like a locust trying to stop the car. If they want to touch you, it is as easy as destroying an ant. Jiang Rulan suddenly realized that Xian Zihao did not even ask her where she lived. Thinking about the information he had collected about herself, she immediately took a stand. She felt this man's calmness was terrifying. I know you have a brother. You depend on your job to earn money to live, and you also have to support your brother for his college fees. What are you talking about? Jiang Rulan looked at him carefully. In just one day, Xian Zihao managed to investigate all these things. If you want to be a strong woman, you should also consider your condition. Moreover, in the face of such a dilemma, even if you do not consider your safety, you should still consider your brother's. Jiang Rulan looked at the man who had an indifferent expression on his face. Could it be that all rich people are willing to do anything to protect themselves? Even if the person in front of you is a woman you do not know. Xian Zihao suddenly looked at her with cold eyes. Miss Jiang, I have another solution for this situation. Do you want to die because of illness or do you want to disappear from this world with another way? As a dead woman, I don't have to take responsibility for you. Jiang Rulan's expression changed immediately. She understood the meaning behind his words. She did not need him to explain in detail. All right, then. She lowered her eyes and laughed to herself in a low voice. I am just an ordinary human being who afraid of death. Xian Zihao looked at her meaningfully. Miss Jiang, are you laughing at yourself? First, this marriage is to protect yourself, and secondly, you can use your reputation as my wife to defeat your ex-lover. Shouldn't you be happy? Be happy about what? She just sold her soul to the devil. 5 minutes later, the black Land Rover had left under the dim light of the night while Jiang Rulan stood in front of the entrance, completely dazed and motionless. One was to protect herself, the other was to attack Han Shuigang. She, Jiang Rulan, had also lost her rational due to her anger. While she was lost in thought, she suddenly felt someone was looking at her from a public phone booth across the residential complex street. L.C. Jiang Rulan looked at the phone booth, and sure enough, she saw a small, sneaky man who seemed to be hiding something in his clothes in a panic. It was a miniature camera. Realizing the situation, Jiang Rulan quickly entered her house. Chapter 18. How can it be compared to other hard work? You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As soon as Jiang Rulan opened the door, only 6 candles on the cake on the coffee table radiated a warm glow on a gloomy night. She was stunned for a moment, then quickly turned on the light in the living room. Jiang Yijuan. Are you skipping class again? Who told you to come here? Sure enough, the calm and romantic atmosphere in the living room was suddenly cracked by the sound of the door opening. Jiang Yijuan, who was about 1.8 meters tall wearing a small bear pajamas and furious slippers, was leaning against her bedroom door. His hands were crossed over his chest and he looked at Jiang Rulan with an indifferent look. Jiang Rulan, in these 2 years, I often wonder if you are a lowly or not. Only after seeing your pajamas, I suddenly realized that you are indeed a lowly. Who would have thought, huh? F***ck. Jiang Rulan's face turned pale, she muttered an incantation and rushed over, tugging at the dead guy's sleeves. Quickly take off my pajamas. I bought it after I got here. If you tore it off, would you buy me a new one? Take it off. Also, I am your sister. How dare you call me by my full name? Jiang Yijuan lowered his head to look at the woman whose height reached to his shoulders. He unconsciously curled his lips and said, You're only a year older than me. If it wasn't for you forcing me to graduate, I would already have been able to support you by getting a job. Jiang Rulan sighed and lowered her hand that was pulling on her pajamas. 7 years ago, I was the one who pulled you along with me as we walked out from Jiang family. I swear that even if we were alone outside, I would do my best to let you study in college or study abroad. But Jiang Rulan, I am a man. I can't bear to see you work so hard. Jiang Rulan walked back to the living room. Looking at 6 candles on the cake, with 2 shades of blue and 4 pinks, representing her 24-year-old age, she felt like crying. Last night was her birthday. She sat down on the sofa and blew out the candles. Then, she took it out one by one. Jiang Rulan secretly looked at the fruit cake in front of her. A thick layer of cream was topped with her favorite strawberries and cherries. She held the few thin candles in her hand and laughed. All the hard work is already in the past. Compared to the torture of life and death that she experienced in the Jiang family at the age of 17, how can it be compared to other hard work? Jiang Yijuan was silent and looked at her for a moment before walking closer. He sat down next to her and tried to hug her. When Jiang Rulan was about to turn around, he hugged her shoulder tightly and did not let her push him away. What are you doing? You are not a child anymore. Even though we are siblings, we cannot be this intimate, right? Let go. I returned to G City last month under the school arrangement. Jiang Ruolan's hands, which had originally been resisting his, suddenly froze. She looked up in astonishment at Jiang Yijuan's face, which seemed to be filled with anxiety. G City. Chapter 19. I cursed you will never get married. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jiang Yijuan only said one sentence and stopped talking. He just hugged Jiang Ruolan tightly. Yijuan. Have you gone back to the Jiang family? Jiang Ruolan frowned. He looked at her in silence, not speaking. Jiang Ruolan panicked and grabbed his arm. Did you go back to our old house? Yes or no? Jiang Yijuan did not respond, and quietly hid the light that surrounded his eyes, hiding his feelings. Suddenly, he covered his stomach and bit his lip. I'm hungry. Bvec. Jiang Ruolan's mouth twitched. Although she was worried, but when she looked at him behaving like that, her heart softened. She got up and entered the kitchen hesitantly. 5 minutes later, while waiting for the water to boil, Jiang Ruolan walked out of the kitchen while wiping her hand and saw Jiang Yijuan still sitting on the sofa. No one knew what he was thinking. She turned and headed straight for the bedroom and found a 2-page book. This account book was the book she asked her classmates made for her when she left the Jiang family with Yijuan 7 years ago. The first page was information about herself, and the second page was Jiang Yijuan. 7 years ago, she left that house resolutely. She still remembered him, Jiang Yijuan, waiting for her at an intersection on a winter night with a temperature of 20 degrees below zero by wearing only a thin jacket and saying that he wanted to go with her. At that time, their bodies were covered with wounds, and in their adolescence, they had experienced the coldness and warmth of the human world. Jiang Ruolan quickly put the household book in her bag. After a while, she walked out of the bedroom and headed straight for the kitchen. Seeing that the water was boiling, she took out 2 bags of noodles from the refrigerator. Jiang Ruolan carefully stirred the noodles with her chopsticks when she suddenly felt the warmth in the back of her waist. She was stunned when she looked to the side and saw that Jiang Yijuan had entered the kitchen and suddenly hugged her waist. He didn't say anything, he just hugged her from behind tightly. His hands covered her stomach and his chin was on the side of her neck. He seriously watched her cook noodles like they were a newlywed couple. Suddenly, he laughed in a dark, hoarse voice. Jiang Ruolan, a woman like you, who has a strong, soft heart on the surface, wouldn't it be too wasteful if you are not married? Jiang Ruolan couldn't be bothered with him. She put down her chopsticks and suddenly twisted Jiang Yijuan's arm and immediately hit his chest. Sure enough, Jiang Yijuan immediately groaned in pain and let her go. Stinking brat, you dare to say that to your sister. The next time you do that again, I will immediately paralyze you. Jiang Ruolan, you despicable woman. I curse you that you will never get married. The wails came howling through the living room. Tisk, I'm afraid your curse had already failed. Jiang Ruolan whispered. Seeing that the noodles were cooked, she put out the fire and stirred the noodles. She turned and looked at Jiang Yijuan, who was sitting on the couch with strawberries in his mouth. After looking at his face carefully, Jiang Ruolan's eyes immediately widened. Why did she feel that his face was similar to Xian Zihao? Chapter 20. Did you guys have a fight? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ever since they agreed to get married that day, Jiang Ruolan had been counting down every day with trepidation. There were still 4 days left until their appointment at the Civil Affairs Bureau. Sister Jiang. Sister Jiang. A natural gas explosion occurred 20 minutes ago in a multi-story building on Songlu Road in the southern suburbs. Not many people are in the reporting department, so the editor-in-chief wants us to go there immediately, to observe the situation. As soon as Jiang Ruolan entered the office, she heard Xiong Rugang's words. Her expression changed drastically, she hurriedly put on her coat and picked up her bag. Let's go. 10 minutes later, they both arrived at the scene. From a distance, they could see a tall building, already surrounded by police tape. Xiong Rugang quickly took out her mini camera and followed behind Jiang Rulan, showing their media work badge as they walked into the security perimeter. The sound of police sirens and ambulances continued to be heard at the scene. Jiang Rulan reached out to help paramedics carry the bloodied people onto a stretcher. She also asked the police and security personnel in the area about the situation. In the midst of mourning and strife, the wounded were being treated one by one. Xiong Rugang then suddenly patted Jiang Rulan on the shoulder. "Sister Jiang, look." Jiang Rulan turned her head to look in the direction Xiong Rugang was pointing at. In the blink of an eye, she was stunned. Xian Zihao was scolding the management of the department with a serious and firm expression. Sometimes, he turned around and said a few words to the staff around him. He was clearly in a meeting when the incident happened and came straight here. He wore a very formal gray and black striped coat. There was no attitude of craziness around the pool at the club that day, and there was no dark and relaxed appearance when he drove her home that day. This building may be one of the buildings invested by Xian Group. When such a big incident happened, Xian Zihao himself came to the scene. "Let's meet President Xian." Xiong Rugang cunningly blinked her big eyes. She dragged Jiang Rulan, who was still questioning the police, towards Xian Zihao. Now is not the time to interview him. Although Jiang Rulan did not expect to meet him at this time, she firmly pulled her hand away from Xiong Rugang's grip. She raised her head and looked at the scorched building not far away with a worried expression. Currently, 17 people have died and 45 people have been injured. After saying that, Jiang Rulan turned around and walked to the fire department to ask about the rescue situation. Xiong Rugang stood still, looking at Jiang Rulan's back with a confused expression. Then, she turned her head to look at Xian Zihao, who was surrounded by a crowd not far away. Half an hour later, most people at the scene, including the media, were cleared out. As Xiong Rugang followed Jiang Rulan back to the car, she asked her with a cunning smile, "Sister Jiang, did you guys have a fight? President Xian seemed to have seen you just now, but he reacted as if he saw a stranger. Tell me the truth, did you quarrel?"